All right, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. I'm going to try to do something different from the traditional multiplayer version of Breya that I play. I actually dipped my toes into 1v1 a little bit, mostly because I had someone, a few people actually ask me about it. Sort of, I think they're under the impression that the multiplayer wins are not as legitimate as they would be if they were in 1v1. Maybe because I have access to better cards, or maybe because the opponents typically build more tuned 1v1 decks, or at least that's the expectation. However, I haven't found that second piece to necessarily be the case, but I have a similar expectation. So I thought I'd check it out. And I've played with a lot of different ideas because when you lose Winter Orb in Strip Mine, the two main ways that the stack attacks mana are gone, and it's an extreme punish for this deck specifically. You'll also lose Mind Twist and Sensei's Divining Top and a couple of other cards, Mind Twist being the other super powerful card. But the number one blow to the deck is the loss of Winter Orb for sure. So I tried a bunch of different crazy ideas, and some of them may come up in the games. I don't remember exactly what the build was, but at this time, what I'm currently settled on for 1v1 is the build that you see in front of you. So there's actually quite a few changes in here. There's no Sensei's Divining Top. Right now I have a non-card holding the slot, Gutaxian Probe. There's no Winter Orb. I actually have limited resources holding the slot. Now there's a trick with limited resources. It does say that each player would choose 5 lands they control and sack the rest. You can only play lands as long as there are 10 or more on the battlefield. If you play this card and you have a couple of fetch lands, for example, and then you sack them and you brought back them into play directly, that will bypass. You can actually have 5 lands on your opponent's side and 7 lands on your side by doing that trick. The other thing with brought back, of course, is that it accelerates you into getting to where you have 5 lands. And if your opponent's behind on land drops, because let's say you go turn 2, brought back, so now you've got 4, so now you play your 5th land, and you cast limited resources right then, so it's your opponent's second, your opponent's second turn, but you have 5 mana out, so they've got 2, right? None of their lands are destroyed, none of yours are destroyed. And on their third turn, they play a land. On your turn, you play a land. On their turn, they play a land. And now they've got 4 to your 6, and the game's locked down at that point. So there's a few tricks there. But the main thing with limited resources is that the whole point of Winter Orb initially was to prevent your opponent from continuously replaying their commander. Because the problem that any control deck has to answer in commander is, how do I deal with the commander of my opponents who's going to just continue to be played? And the number one answer is definitely Winter Orb, in the sense that you can just make it so that by the time they get around to playing their commander, it's way too late in the game. Certainly not going to continuously hammer you with it over and over and over. Like, even if they play it and you kill it, you've got time to look for more removal before their next opportunity to play it. So limited resources can provide the function that you're looking for in this deck, which is that you want to make it so that they cannot get enough mana available to them to hit you with a recurring commander problem over and over and over, and limited resources is a way to do that. So that's why that's in there. It could be, and maybe ultimately, better as Rising Waters over here on the 4 mana slot, but I like the fact that limited resources is so cheap. I think it's a really interesting card. And so for now, I think I'll leave it the way that it is. But it is something to consider, certainly. Rising Waters, there's also a Winter Orb effect in a creature. There's a 4-drop white flyer. It's 1 white, 3 colorless, I believe. And there are a couple of other options. And I think at one point I even had a Mishra's Helix combined with limited resources in the deck. But I kind of came to the conclusion that all you need is limited resources. So Mishra's Helix is a 5-drop artifact with X activation, in which you tap X lands. So you could get them down to, the thought process when I started was that I limited resources us both down to 5 lands, and now my 5 lands tap their 5 lands every upkeep, so they're down to just playing instants. And so if you added in the 3-drop Planeswalker that prevents them from playing instants, or Teferi, or both, some kind of combination, you could basically put together this kind of like lock so the opponent can never play anything ever again. But the truth of the matter is, it's just not necessary. And having all these cards that don't really help you when you're losing is not good. Limited resources, like if you have Helix, for example, you're playing against a green ramp deck, and they ramp out and they're threatening to start dropping Eldrazi bombs that you can't counter the effect on and are a huge threat, right? You need a way to stop that. And so Helix may not be the answer, because with Helix, I have to have enough mana to tap them down, and I may not be able to tap enough of their lands for them to even care if they're that far ahead. On the other hand, limited resources comes down, boom, they're all the way back down to 5 lands and they're stuck there. That's a much better position, although they can still cultivate and play cards that'll put rampant growth lands directly into play, but at least you've got a fighting chance. And in a game where they do that, don't forget that at some point you could potentially Cryptic Command your limited resources back into your hand, replay it, and get those other lands too, if you need to. So alternately, you could disenchant limited resources, and you could replay it off of a Yawgmoth's Will, for example. There's a couple other tricks you can do in order to take advantage, or you could just disenchant it end of their turn if you had enough white mana, and then just brought it back directly into play, and suddenly the effect is going to happen, because it's not on cast, it's on entering play. So there's that. Other changes, Archmage's Charm is actually in here with, there's only one Strip Mine effect with Wasteland, and so I feel like it's a little bit easier to get triple blue early enough to take a Soul Ring, so I decided to play Archmage's Charm. So far, so good. I'm happy with it, but we'll see. And then because of that same line of thought, I'm actually running an Azorius Chancery, and the Azorius Chancery I haven't been punished yet. I'm sure it'll happen at some point, but Azorius Chancery is just a Soul Ring in a land, right? It's a Soul Ring that produces colored mana in a land. So if their opponent's not able to punish it with removal, it's just an incredibly potent ability. It's a very powerful effect for you to have access to. And so it's worthwhile, I think, to take the risk in a one Strip Mine format with 100 cards singleton. A lot of times you can just wait for them to strip something, and then you can play the Chancery knowing that it's highly unlikely they're going to be able to, that there's going to be a punish. So that's it. That's the build. And I want to go over the game. So what's the record with this deck? Well, if you include all of the changes over time, right? If you include where I started out with a very different deck, I had double Armageddon and stuff, and you move your way towards this, which is where I'm at. The game history of the last 30 days in the 1v1 format, so we'll take out all this other stuff in case it shows up in there to muck up the results. Well, it doesn't show it here, but I counted. So the results were, and you can see there's a loss there. There is a loss here. In grand total, there's the deck is 75-5. So I think I'm on the right track. If I could pick up, that's 80 games. If I could pick up 20 more wins, then the deck would be hitting that 95% win rate, which is the sweet spot. There's always going to be games you have no control over. A perfect example being like this last one I played against, was it King Crimson? I think that was the one. It was so frustrating. It was a 13-turn game where I drew mana for 13 turns. 13 turns of drawing mana, and it meant that I could play Breya every other turn, so I wasn't dead, as I was slowly losing the game to my opponent getting beyond where Breya could keep me from losing. And I just needed a business card, but 13 turns of just replaying Breya until I was dead and drawing literally lands and artifact mana. But it was almost all lands, which was the really weird thing. I think I drew in that game something like 20 plus lands in a deck that only runs 29. It was absurd how horrible it was. So anyway, I want to go through the games from the last, let's say, probably the 9th. It's just easier that way. So we'll go through the 9th and the 10th. the 10th will be the closest, or maybe, yeah, the 10th will be the closest to, and the 11th. So, and I played a couple games on 9/11, but not much. Anyway, that'll be as close to the current version as possible. I think the only the differences that come up, I'll point out as they happen. So hopefully, you will enjoy watching the 1v1 deck at work and see what you think about the deck here itself. And of course, as always, interested in what you think. So let's start with the 9/9. I want to kind of point one more thing out though before I get started. Sorry, I've got a text. Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt the video, but I really don't want to redo the whole thing. Anyway, so what I wanted to point out was that on my last video, which was the video on the miscellaneous portion of my channel videos, I discussed Brian Weissman and Grand Prix, or what was it? Not Grand Prix Vegas. It was Old School. It was Old School Vegas or Old School something, whatever event he was in. And my thoughts on the matter, I invite you to check it out if you haven't seen it. The other thing though was that he himself just did a podcast. He participated on someone else's podcast, which was called something Tings. It was called, let me see, I will tell you in a moment. It's called All Things Considered. I guess it's a pun on the NPR show. And I put a link on that last video in the comments, and I pinned that comment. So if you want to go there and you want to check it out and you want to hear Brian talk about Old School in general and also the situation with a moderate, somebody leading the conversation, and a couple of hours of really interesting. There's a lot of backstory. They talk about all kinds of stuff that you might not have heard. It was really interesting and I enjoyed it. So I invite you to check that out if it's something that interests you. And now let's play some Magic. So I'm going to go to the 1v1. So this is what things look like when I'm searching for games. And I'll pop back to this list on occasion. But yeah, let's just get started with the game. So 9/9, first game I've got against Roger 980. Now I'm recording this on the 13th, so I won't remember necessarily all these games. Some of this, I don't even know if any of these have broken replays or not. But hopefully with the amount of games that we have, it'll be interesting. And here my opponent is actually playing Breya as well. So I'm going to lead off with an Imperial Seal. Getting an Ancient Tomb to disguise. I could have got a Crypt, but then my opponent knows that I don't have Mana Source, that I don't have a land drop, and so by doing it that way, I actually hid that from my opponent. And here I get to quickly, because I top deck a land, I get to slam in with a Spellseeker, throw it on Jitte. I've got Mana Drain up. Opponent tries an Innocent Blood, and normally I would not protect this creature, but because it has the sword and I have the Jitte, and a lot of my gameplay is kind of invested in this right now, I go ahead and do so. I go ahead and protect it. So my opponent then plays a Spellseeker of their own and tutors up a Swords to Plowshare. For my turn, I top deck this Serum Visions, and I see Cryptic and Workshop. And I've also got some mana floating. I also drew for the turn Chromatic Lantern. So I decided to run it like this. I'm not going to be able to protect my Spellseeker. But what I did do is I set myself up so that I'd be able to get off a pretty gnarly Mind Shatter and also have mana for Breya later by putting Workshop on top of the deck. So now I can go after my opponent's hand, or in this case, Breya, smash, untap, and then get the hand on the way out. So boom. Because my opponent decided not to use the opportunity to play Swords to Plowshares, they tried to play a blocker instead in the form of Breya. It gave me the opportunity to severely punish my opponent for that choice. And of course, that's what I do. So on my turn, I go ahead and bounce their one of their artifact mana, and then use my Jitte plus Breya to remove all their blockers, attack in, and make them discard the artifact mana that I just bounced. On my turn, after I untap all my lands, I then use the fact that it's a Workshop to replay Breya, and of course with Chromatic Lantern, I'm able to tap the Ancient Tomb for colored mana here, so I can actually only take 1 damage from the City of Brass. And at this point, my opponent scoops. If my opponent could replay Breya, then the only thing that would happen is for 2 mana, I could kill the Breya, and then Jitte would remove the flyers just like I did last time, and then I'd swing in with these 2 cards again. So that a decision of my opponent not to play the plow, but rather get greedy and try to get their commander out. Totally punished my opponent for that, and so I'm able to win a draw that was really a little bit sketchy. Next 2 games I have against Kyle JP86. So, and this opponent is playing Risk the Redeemed, so I'm not sure how much of a fight this is going to be. But you see I have an Imperial Seal here, and I also have a Narset. So I decided that what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to, and you can see the Chancery here being awesome, provided my opponent doesn't strip it, right? But runs out of Mana Crypt, Kodama's Reach. So the plan here is to put together a Narset deck Faden package. And so I decide, so I've got Brought Back there, and I think, okay, well, this is excellent because with Brought Back right there, I'm going to be able to return either Dak Faden or Narset if I need to. If I can find a white mana, for example, my opponent attacked. So I didn't anticipate this card. What I was thinking is my opponent would attack Narset, take it down to 2 counters, and then if I find a white mana, I could minus it. I could even minus it to look for a white producing artifact mana, right? Minus it, and then brought it back directly into play and minus it once again. But my opponent had Mirari's Wake, so now it's on 1, so it's a little bit weaker than it was. But I do manage to top deck a Mind Shatter, so I'm going to go ahead and hammer my opponent's hand. They've got tons of mana out there, and I can't stop that right now. But at least this way, my opponent doesn't have the ability to hopefully do much with it. Unfortunately, my opponent top decks this Increasing Devotion, which is pretty sick when you combine it with Awake, but chose, for some reason, not to attack Narset there. So I go ahead and just get Necro into play, and I'm going to have to take some serious beats here, but I decide that makes more sense than deluging because they've got the ability to flash back the Increasing Devotion. And so I wanted a way to take that Wake off the board. It also lets me pay 1 life for the Toxic Deluge instead of 2. And now I've got Force of Negation kind of protecting my position here, and I feel pretty good about the situation all told. Opponent then runs out their commander and pluses it up with Orin Reef, the Vastwood. But my commander is a bit of a trump for their commander, and so I go ahead and play it, a Talisman, kill their commander, and grab a few more cards off of Necro. I mean, the bottom line is I have Necro running. It is extremely, extremely hard to win a game if this deck gets Necro out. And this game is proving no exception. Opponent just replays their commander again. Not a big deal. And finally realizes that the game is over. I think actually, you don't see it here, but I actually think I threw down Vedalken Shackles or something. Did I? I don't even know if I did. I think my opponent just thinks it through and packs it in, right? It's I know what I had done. I cast Dak Faden and I stole their crypt, and then I sacked the crypt and the Thopter and I killed their wrists and I smashed them. And then played Shackles or something, and then my opponent just completely gave up there. I'll check out that message in just a moment. So then we ended up jumping. I set up another game. My opponent jumped in again, and this time brings their good deck, I guess, Zergo Bellstriker, and then decides not to play against me and concede. So I'm not sure what that was about. Let me see what this message is about. Oh yeah. Right. So I was talking with 5-color bad stuff there that about some 1v1, some previous lists that I had used, not in 1v1, but in the multiplayer version, including my Edric list and Sliver Queen, because he was interested in, well, a 5-color deck, funny enough. And so I said, well, here's some cards that you won't see me use in Breya because they're green, so you could check out some of these other lists and see what you think. All right, so anyway, we've got this game against Yourbonds 94 running Queen Marchesa, which can definitely be a problem. And I decided to keep on the strength of Preordain, hoping that I can use that to get to some mana. And I am able to hit 1 land there and tutor up a mana drain via Merchant Scroll, but I do not lock into that second land that I need to make Narset good. Excuse me, hiccups. My opponent runs out Recruiter of the Guard, and I'm able to mana drain here, which is huge. and allows me to pump that mana into a Thran Dynamo, into a Crucible, into a land. So now I am all set. I can do a combo turn of Treachery into Mind Shatter potentially. Unfortunately, my opponent plays a Karn and then pluses Karn up and reveals a Return to Dust. So of course I give him Care Keep. Or I think I give him Care Keep. I may have given him Return to Dust here with the intention of attempting to hit it with Mind Shatter. Yeah, I think that's what I did because I Mind Shatter for 5. So they've got 6 cards. So as long as they don't keep the Return to Dust here, giving them Return to Dust is better rather than letting them hide it under Karn. So that's actually what I did. So the card that's exiled is Care Keep, and I'm shattering for 5 in a 6-card hand, and I need to hit that Return to Dust. And boom. There it is right there. So this was a tech play where I actually gave my opponent the best card off of a Karn activation. And my opponent reveals a Knight's Whisper. So now they've got a Knight's Whisper and a Care Keep hiding over there. But I'm able to then Treachery their Hellrider, which is the card that I gave them the last time they activated Karn. Slam Narset, dig, find a Vindicate. Ha! That was very lucky. Play Talisman, Vindicate that Karn, and pass with the Plowshare up to protect Narset against another hasted creature like, say, Queen Marchesa. So if my opponent played the Queen, would have became the Monarch, I plow the thing, and then my opponent would have had to deal with the fact that I would then, they draw an extra card, but then they would not draw an extra card, sorry, Narset would prevent them from getting an extra card off of the Monarch, and then I would swing back and take the Monarch back anyway, and then I'd be taking an extra card. So at this point, my opponent just gives up. All right. So the next game is against Goose 84 or Gussie. It's hard to say, but I don't know. Maelstrom Wanderer here is so my opponent's running Maelstrom Wanderer, and I have an acceptable hand. I've got Force of Will, a card I can afford to force with, a Confidant, and a way to get faster mana. So I'm going to go ahead and it's safe enough to get the Soaring here because the plan is to play Confidant, so I don't need to go get Mana Crypt. I could have played Crypt and went Confidant Impulse, but I'm actually holding Impulse for Force of Will. And glad I did for the Bolt, because I'd rather not Force of Will Teaching since it represents 2 cards. And off a top deck Vandal Blast, I get to set my opponent back to 2 mana and beat him for 2. Opponent then plays a Nissa Vastwood, and I find myself a Vindicate, which I go ahead and Vindicate and then search for a card and pass, and the card I search for, Wasteland. I'm going to go ahead and nail their red mana and continue the mana suppression, playing a Gilded Lotus, and my opponent's just missed a few land drops, but still manages to hit one here, so okay, fair enough. I top deck Sword of Feast and Famine, so gnarly, so I'm going to go ahead and equip the sword and smash. Now I'm going after their hand as well, so that's going to be even less options that my opponent has, and that allows me to possibly set up for a turn later where I can bounce one of their lands. And right at this moment, my opponent plays a Rex land first, then Rex Sage, so I go ahead and counter that and bounce the land that they played, and then my opponent just gives up. So they would have had 3 cards in hand. So the plan was to go use Teachings to get Yogg-Will, and then Will with a sword doubling my mana. And so I'd Will play the Wasteland from the graveyard, use it for mana to play like a Vindicate, for example, attack, untap all of my lands, and then Imperial Seal for like a Crucible or a Tezzeret, most likely. Imperial Seal for a Tezzeret, who I can then use to get a Crucible. Wasteland my opponent during their upkeep, and then repeat. So anyway, at this point, the mana suppression is too much. I kind of got his goose, and we have to move on to the next game. So I have Mason B 1256 here, and we're coming up on a loss here, a first loss at some point, but it's not this one. Opponent's playing Mirko Vosk Mind Drinker. So I go ahead and lead off with another preordained hand. I've got a nice fetch land there. Opponent plays Dream Twist, which mills me a little bit. So I go ahead and play a land here. Opponent then mills me again, hitting a Mystical Teachings, which is nice. I go ahead and play a fetch. At the end of my opponent's turn, I'm going to go ahead and just attempt a brought back for 1 land. It's enough, and I'm satisfied with getting one extra land into play here. Unfortunately, my opponent does have a counter that mills me, but not too big of a deal. I feel like this is a good chance for me to try to get an Imperial Seal off. Opponent goes for a mill effect to counter the Imperial Seal, and I try to protect it with Mana Leak. My opponent has Quench, so the Imperial Seal is basically countered by the mill. However, my opponent's down to only 2 cards in hand, and this is the important thing here. They're basically dumping their hand rather, to make no headway against me. I'm still at 69 cards. I mean, I'm not exactly threatened by this at all. It's complete foolishness, in my opinion, to try to win this way. But some people enjoy that kind of foolishness. Anyway, they counter me and mill some more cards, and I go ahead and Azorius Chancery land back into my hand. You can see how good Chancery is right here. I mean, look at my mana situation, how good it got right after that. So I'm just going to chill for now. I've got almost enough mana to flashback Teachings. I go ahead and just play a land. And then post-combat, I'm going to run out Spellseeker. It actually sticks, so I still have Forbid up. And so I can get a counterspell. So now I have a much better opportunity to win a counter war if I need to. Opponent goes for a Diabolic Tutor. Of course, I'm not going to counter that. I have 2 counterspells in my hand for the follow-up play. And the best thing they can do really is just get Cavern of Souls at that point. I'm going to go ahead and attack with Seeker. Chancery, of course, also makes Tithe a little bit better. But I'm going to go ahead and run out. The problem is that I've already, between the milling and the drawing, I've got so many lands that there's not a lot for me to do. My opponent then plays Aristic Tutor, and I decide to forbid with buyback, throwing away Tithe and Dak Faden, because I don't want to Dak plus myself too much due to the fact my opponent's trying to mill me out, and they've shown 0 targets for Dak. So opponent then plays a main phase Vampiric Tutor, which is very, very crazy. And I've been sitting on this will the whole time, just prepping and prepping and prepping for this turn, where I finally flashback Mystical Teachings, Enlightened Tutor, and I go get a Limited Resources. So boom, Limited Resources with me. I actually get 6 mana off my lands thanks to the Chancery. My opponent's reduced, boom, boom, down to only 5 lands, and I know that my opponent fetched with the main phase of Vampiric Tutor, so I've got my opponent down to 5 lands, and I have the ability to play 1, 2 counter spells, plus theoretically Force of Negation, but basically 2 counter spells, and my opponent can't get more than 5 lands, and they have no artifact mana and don't seem to be playing any. So basically, my opponent's in a situation where the card they tutored for, if it costs 6, they'll never be able to play it. So I may have just killed the card they tutored for. But if it doesn't cost 6 or more, right, then they can play it, but how do they back it up with the counter magic when they're stuck on 5? So it looks like whatever they went might have been that, but I don't even care about that card, so I just let it happen. I'm not going to blow a counter on a card that I don't care about. And this looks like a great time to will. And will right here is so insane. I don't need to be any greedier than I've already been setting this up the whole time. And as you can see, way, way, way before we finish resolving the Yawgmoth's Will, my opponent backs it in. Completely absurd turn. It was going to get even more absurd very, very soon. So, yeah. Anyway, so that's it against Mason B 1256. You can see the how the limited resources works a little bit, how well it works there. So we were on Rexus. Next opponent, excuse me. I'm trying to suppress hiccups here. My opponent has Samut, Voice of Dissent as their commander, so they can be playing 3 colors, and I have a Wasteland for a turn 1 Corrosion Verge. I don't typically go first turn Wasteland, but being able to do that there was great, because that was like wasting 2 lands. Opponent runs out some extra mana, and I'm going to go ahead and Vamp Tutor and get my Mana Crypt into a Thran Dynamo setup with Force of Negation backup. Opponent runs out Sterling Grove. I'm not going to counter that because, sure, you can have Sterling Grove and just no other things to protect. That's what I'm thinking anyway at this point in the game. And I'm going to go ahead and shatter my opponent's mind for 5. Boom. Dumped. Dump trucked. My opponent top decks a land, doesn't quit. So I have to give him points for tenacity at this point. But obviously the game is over. I'm going to go ahead and run out of land here and then just play my commander. And I believe take out that Blister Pod. I can't quite remember. So when it dies, they actually get the potential for extra mana. Yeah, that's right. They tried to plow my commander, so I go ahead and just sack. I don't need Crypt at this point. I'm going to go ahead and kill the Blister Pod. They've now got the Scion that will produce 1 extra mana, and I don't want my opponent to have hardly any mana. The suppression is real in this game. However, I feel like I can safely factor fiction, and I do here, and my opponent don't think they fully understand how it works, but yeah, they give me all 5, so I just go ape with tons of mana production. I'm about to throw down a Skull Clamp, and then I'm going to go ahead and be able to clamp my Thopter, and then on the next turn, oh, hold on a sec. Turn that off, please. Turn that off, or you can take it in the living room, son. So what's going to happen, of course, is that, as you can see, well, they can't see, but I think they misread fact or whatever. But on the next turn, I get to cast limited resources. Let's say my opponent, well, say they play a land, let's say they don't, right? Either way, I play limited resources first, then I play Urborg because my opponent actually doesn't have 5 lands. So I can actually get up to 6. My opponent will be stuck on, I'm threatening at that point, and with the Thopter Clamp, I'm going to have even more lands. To lock my opponent down to 3 lands per turn by getting that 6th land into play and potentially a 7th before they get another land. The other thing with limited resources is interesting. You can get, let's say I had 6 and they had 4. I can cryptic one of their lands at the end of their turn, play one of my own on my turn, and now they're stuck on 1 less land for the rest of the game. So super cool. But this game was already won by the giant Mind Twist right there. All right. So next game against Teejam 293 there. I assume that's, what is that, Toe Jam? Funky. All right, anyway, playing Sliver Overlord, and I've got a Mana Crypt hand that looks pretty spicy, along with the limited resources there. My opponent Enlightened Tutors in response to Preordain. I guess they're trying to keep me from finding a... hold on, I'm going to pause right there, because this is actually really important. So maybe they're trying to prevent me from getting a mental misstep, but I don't agree with this play. I still think that's worthwhile risk. But because they Enlightened Tutor for Ristic Study, they let the cat out of the bag, which means I slam Mana Crypt before their turn starts, so that I don't have to pay mana for it, and so I have extra mana for later. And I was looking at, so now I run out. It frees me up. And I run out Stoneforge Mystic, and at the time I was running Batterskull, so I just go get a Batterskull here, because in this position I want to be able to make a play without actually playing a card. My opponent at this point has mulliganed pretty hard, and with Enlightened Tutor and then the fact that Ristic Study does nothing, the Sliver is terrible. Basically, they have almost no cards in hand. I'm able to Mind Shatter the last few cards out of their hand. Play a Cavern of Souls. Obviously naming human. I can play Breya here. I mean, at this point, I can basically do whatever I want. My opponent's Ristic Study is completely useless, and I'm not even sure how I would necessarily play it out. If I would bother to run out Batterskull, I might. I think what I was going to do this turn was play Urza, and off of the Cavern of Souls because it's human. So Urza off of Cavern, Colosseum, 2 crypts. 2 from the Crypt and 1 from Urborg. And then I would get the 1/1 who I could tap with Urza and this Tundra to sneak the Batterskull. So it's going to go Urza's Skull. I don't think that's beatable. So before I can even get there, though, my opponent just gives up, which is fine by me. All right, so next game is against MRA 115003888. And this opponent is playing... Yahenni Undying Partisan, so mono black, and I've got a Soul Ring draw against mono black. That's always a good thing. And I go ahead and dig a little bit to look for mana. I find Mana Crypt, but it's not exactly what I was hoping for. But it does get me a little bit closer. Fortunately, I'm able to top deck a Demonic Tutor there, and I go ahead and just tutor up an Opal, and with the Opal, I run out a Urza, so that my opponent's got a lot of diverse things that they need to attack on the board, hopefully making it too difficult for them to prevent me from... Hopefully they don't have anything to go after my hand, which would have been a problem, and it turns out that they don't. And so now I actually Strangely enough, because I have Urza, I can tap Island and I can tap the Soul Ring for blue, so I'm actually sitting on a counterspell here, even though it doesn't look like it. And I was setting up for a really lovely Yogg Will, and then my opponent plays Bojuka Bog, so a little bit disappointing, but I'll rebuild and we'll get another Will just a little bit later down the road. And I decide to go ahead and play Breya here after my opponent plays their commander. It's Smash for 8, which is crazy. I still have counter magic up because I can tap the Thopters for blue, Breya for blue, Mana Crypt for blue. Opponent plays Sword of the Animist, replays the Skeleton, and I don't even use my mana here. I just wait until I draw and I activate Urza, and I see. I don't even remember. I think this is not quite how the game played out, but I activate Urza and I decided at this point in the game that what I want to do is I'm going to beat my opponent down with Urza activations. I want to quickly get up to 5 mana and limited resources my opponent out of the game. But meanwhile, I'm great shape here. And sorry that one bugged out, but yeah, I completely take over the game. Pretty much, my opponent had that one chance to like him me or something to get in the game, and it didn't happen, and it was over after that. With Urza out, very hard for my opponent to really punish me with hand destruction anyway, just because Urza can refill. All right, so in this game I'm playing against Males Lamont 83, who gets a first turn Soul Ring draw, running Maelstrom Wanderer there. And so we'll see what happens here. But I do have copy artifact, so I can at least, well, I have Enlightened Tutor, right? So what I decide to do is Enlightened Tutor, instead of getting Soul Ring or something, because I have no play on that turn, I decide to get copy artifact because it spends my mana more efficiently. I can use both of my mana to make a play rather than just 1 or 0. And then from there, I'm able to get Teferi, tuck their Soul Ring, and my opponent scoops it up. And I can't remember what my opponent said to me in this game, and it doesn't matter. Oh, excuse me. Here's another game, though, where you can see that the Better Skull is sitting in my hand. So I really like the card a lot, but it is better if the format's more aggressive, and the format doesn't seem super aggressive. So ultimately, I've cut it. But we'll see what happens here. My opponent playing Yidris, Roger McFeely, gets a first turn preordain, and I've got a hand with Disenchant in it, and that's pretty much a reason to keep a hand a lot of times. Opponent runs out 3 visits. I've got a fetch land, so they can't just like wasteland me or something. Get a second fetch. Go ahead and play that, hoping, thinking, well, I can Disenchant or I can muddle. Excuse me, my opponent tries a Nature's Lore, and I decide that I'm going to muddle this. And I can't remember exactly what the thinking was. My opponent runs out a Demonic Tutor there, and I'm hoping I don't get punished for that aggressive muddle, the mixture. But they actually do punish me slightly. They get a Time Warp, so they get to actually take another turn here, get another land drop, and they're getting very close to their commander, running out of prime time. And getting 2 more lands into play. So it looks like they're ready to get their commander, but I've got a trick up my sleeve. I have Vampiric Tutor for Workshop. I ready the prime time off the board, cheat out a Lotus, and pass. My opponent plays yet another land and Yidris, as well as a Harmonize, but not quite done yet. So I'm going to run out my commander, take theirs out, and pass for the turn. I actually am sitting on a Muddle, if I want it, with a Snapcaster. Opponent has just boatloads of mana over there. Goes for a Primal Command. I let it happen. They get rid of my Planeswalker. End of turn, I disenchant their Crypt. They used a Primal Command to force me to shuffle it away, so that happened. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and run out to Teferi and draw an extra card, untap some lands, and pass for the turn because I don't want my opponent to ever be able to attack. They play Tooth and Nail here. So I'll be honest, in reviewing this, I don't think I played this correctly, but I'm going to do my best to try to win. My opponent plays Bane of Progress. With the triggered ability on the stack, I kill the Bane of Progress. Opponent plays a Prophet of Krufix, and I lose all of my artifact mana. But my opponent also loses one as well, but then follows it up with a Consecrated Sphinx. So they have to give him a couple of cards, but I do tuck the Sphinx, and then I attempt to take away the cards that I had to give them by drawing for the turn with a Mind Shatter, and boom, it hits. So I got a Soul Ring and a Jace. That's pretty nice. Opponent then I'm pretty sure is about to send Prophet at the Teferi there, but runs out Yidris first. and goes ahead and attempts to take out Teferi, but I decide I'm going to Snapcaster, sacrifice my Snap just to protect my Teferi. Unfortunately, the last card in my opponent's hand that they top decked was Terminate, so Teferi down. Okay, well, that was unfortunate. I do have to replay my commander and take out Yidris or deal with it. And it looks like we're going to bug out this game, so actually I cannot fill you in on the rest of what happened. But I was in pretty good shape. I'm going to go ahead and close this game out though because it is bugged. I do win the game ultimately, and I think what actually happened is I get a window of opportunity to do a search, and I fetch limited resources, and then from there my opponent can never play their commander again. They just give up. So, man, I'm getting texted left and right. Apologize for all this. All right, so that was Roger McFeely. So next game on 9-9 is Earl Wayne. We'll run through this one as well. And I think the next video will probably be conducted live. We'll see what happens. So, and this is against Savine, the Chronoclasm. And I don't think I'd ever really seen this card, but I've got a very nice keepable hand that gets even better when I top deck a Talisman of Creativity. So go ahead and shop into the Talisman. I was planning on playing this a little bit different, but I've got Force of Will here is the main reason why I think that I chose to keep this hand, and of course the potential for an early Stoneforge. I'm going to run him out, and I think I'm going to go get a Sword here, and just get that on the board immediately, and then pass. So now I'm looking pretty good. Now I could have gone a Jitte route where I would Jitte the Stoneforge and then clamp it, and then minus the Jitte in order to draw extra cards at some point, but I decided not to. My opponent, instead I do the Sword thing, and my opponent has a Saheeli Sublime Artificer, and I chose not to Force a Will it there, and they've got a Mox Amber, which is a artifact, which is a non-creature spell, so they get a 1/1 artifact, which means that they can block here. So on my turn, I actually impulse into a Chancery and then pick up the Workshop, and I attack Saheeli for 1. Of course, my opponent doesn't block. Opponent then runs out a Sword of Fire and Ice, and I've got to Force a Will that, so I'm out of remand. And I was keen on making sure that I kept a blue card in my hand for the Force of Will, so I'm finally able to do that. I run out of Lotus and decide to hit my opponent for all of the cards in their hand with a Mind Shatter. And then I clamp the Stoneforge so that if I need to, I can attack Saheeli for 2, or I can draw 2 cards here. My opponent decides to give me 2 cards, which is an interesting choice. And then for their turn, plays a Ponder, gets another Servo. Kind of impressed by this Saheeli, honestly. And then runs out their commander, hits me for 1 and passes. Anyway, for my turn, I'm able to play Breya, and I clamp up a Thopter and draw extra cards, finding some artifact mana, which I can run out Grim into Talisman, into Sack, and kill their commander, who is a huge threat. And I do it by killing Breya. I'm sitting on a counterspell now. You notice I'm building up to the 5th land, which is about to come down in just a moment. My opponent has no play finally, so I'm going to go ahead and play a land and play, I think, my commander. Yep. And from there, I'm going to tap and equip the Thopter who's not summoning sick and attack my opponent. I want that card out of their hand, so I get that. I get all my mana back. Now I can run out the Batterskull, and I can run out the limited resources, and I can also sack. So now we're down to my opponent actually has to sacrifice a land, and they'll be stuck on 5 lands forever. And from there I can sack 2 Thopters and kill the Saheeli, or nearly kill it, depending on what I want to do. Or I can just clamp the Thopters and draw 4 cards, which is probably what I do. I just leave my opponent as is and call it good. And yeah, my opponent complains about limited resources, and I say, well, you know, it's not my fault they banned Winter Orb. I don't think that's the answer they wanted to hear. Anyway, I've got this game against Zack that I lose. We can run through it. I don't remember how or why. And we'll see what happens. It's a heck of a start. My opponent's playing Olaro. I think I just misplayed this game. I don't really remember. So I get to lead off with Tundra. Opponent runs out a Nozoria's Signet. Really surprised that I lost this game. This doesn't look like the kind of game I would lose. So I go ahead and get a Crypt there. Oh, I remember. I remember this one, I think. Anyway, I run out Grim, mana, more mana, and more mana. So pretty good start. Especially now, I'm going to go get Sword of Feast and Famine, kill one of my opponent's lands and pass. And they have Hymn to Torok. So I lose Fabricate and Stone. Sword, rather. I top deck Spellseeker, and I make a huge mistake here. I still think that I need to develop here because I can't play Breya yet. So go ahead and Tithe. And I grab a couple of lands here. That gives me the black that I need. In case I draw a black card, I want to be able to be in this game. I get a red land so that I can have a backup at the Talisman. And at this point now, yeah, I can run out Breya. And my opponent plays a Standstill. They're playing a Loro, so there's no pressure on them. And so what I'm going to try to do is I want to get my opponent up to 7 cards in hand, and then I'm going to break the Standstill and hopefully overflood them. But alternately, what I can do is I could top deck any equipment, and I can just cheat it into play with Stoneforge, including Batterskull, which is still in the deck at this time. And if I do that, then my opponent has to break the Standstill and Ancestral Me, and I totally win that game. So my opponent's got a Dreadship Reef that they're charging up here, and I just kind of want you to pay attention to what my draws look like, or we can step through it. So right now, if you look at the action cards I've drawn, so I've drawn 1, 2, tutors 3, 4, 5, 6 action cards so far this game, and we are 19 cards deep. So 6 spells out of 19 is not that great out of 19 cards, right? And that's, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, that's it. At any rate, I don't know if this game, hopefully it doesn't bug out. It looks like it might. Yeah, this game's going to bug out. So my game plan is no good if my opponent, yeah, this is not what happened. My game plan is no good if my opponent continues to hit their land drops. Because if my opponent continues to hit their land drops, what's going to happen is that they're going to be able to, they feel no hand size pressure with the Standstill running to make an action. And so they're continuing to hit their land drops, and there's very little that I can do to pressure them other than top deck equipment, which I never do. This is not what I drew. In fact, I don't know at what point we got off, but I think the Vindicate's wrong, because I actually don't think I drew that many action spells. I don't think I drew a Vindicate here. I didn't draw a Skull Clamp here. I actually think I drew nothing. But at any rate, at least I don't think. But what I do know is that every card I draw from this point on for the rest of the game, and the game goes on all the way to the point where I'm down to, yeah, I counted up. At the end, I said, I think this is, I don't think I've been this flooded in literally 10 years. I drew 22 mana sources and 6 spells. So the 6 cards, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I guess maybe this was the 6. I get to cheat it into play, clamp this guy, draw 2 cards that were both mana sources, clamp it onto the Stoneforge, continue to attack for 2, but I never drew another card again. So I drew 22 mana sources and 6 spells over the course of this game. And on turn, I don't know, 13, 9, 10, 11. I don't remember which turn we ended up on, but I think it was like turn 13. I finally concede because I just get ground out. I mean, I couldn't play the game. I just got nothing. So, Zack played well and hit me with a powerful effect, and it's just what happens. All right, so moving on, I had this game against Ezekiel 12. You guys have mentioned in the past that sometimes you want to see me lose, and there is a perfect opportunity of a game that is just a losing game, right? So Niv Mizzet, the Firemind is my opponent's commander. They play Elixir of Immortality, so you already know right away that they're not fully cogent with really deck building when it comes right down to it. All right, so I get to run out an expedition map here. Sadly, if I sack the map with the Mox Opal, then the Mox Opal will turn off. So I got to be slightly cautious of that. But, excuse me, I'm able to Enlighten Tutor and go get a Crypt. I run out Crypt, and then I go ahead and Tithe and go get double land drops here. Excuse me, run out a Teferi, tuck their Keystone Rune, and tack in for a few points of damage there. Probably could have held back and just protected Teferi. The 2 damage not likely to matter, but then again, it looks like they're playing a control deck. There's very few haste creatures in a control deck. It may have been better to hold back, but life total can matter too. So when you're trying to evaluate, you always want to consider, if they were like a mono red aggro deck, I would have held back to protect because there'd be a chance that they'd have, a Hell Rider or something along those lines. Anyway, I'm able to actually draw and get out enough mana for Breya without actually sacking the map. So my opponent attempts to counter. Yeah. Opponent then attempts to counter, I guess, Breya? I don't think that's right. I think we might be bugged here. No, maybe they did. Maybe they attempted to counter it. Anyway, on their turn, they try to play a clone, and I've got, because this definitely did happen. My opponent tries to play this clone effect, and I've got Breya and a Trinket Mage, and I'm thinking, wow, if they get Trinket Mage, they're going to get more mana, and I definitely don't want them getting a Soul Ring here, because this is one of those win by mana pressure hands. And so I sack Breya and tap to Mana Vault in order to kill my own Trinket Mage, let their clone resolve, and the only target they can have is a 1/1 flyer. So I draw a card off of Teferi. I play Winter or Wasteland here, and then here's a beautiful thing. I'm able to run out limited resources with the Wasteland in play. And so what's really cool about this is that I'm going to pause. Is that next turn I can actually sack the. So we're down to both 5 and 5. Neither of us can play a land. But next turn I can sack the Wasteland to kill their Madblind Mountain, and then play a land from my hand. I'll still have 5, they'll have 4, and if they don't have a land drop on that turn, then I have the potential to follow up with a Wasteland on the subsequent turn and potentially have 6 to 4 and have even more advantage. If they do have a land drop, well, no big deal, but at least I give it a shot that way. So I'm actually not going to use a Wasteland in anticipation of limited resources. I'm going to use it afterwards. Oh yeah, this was the guy that played slow. So I actually ended up reporting this guy for slow play. He spent. You see the clock here is already like 7 minutes. Well, it just runs and runs and runs and runs. 27 minutes versus 50. Yeah, my opponent, awful opponent who basically, I don't know, it was the limited resources just sent him on tilt. So Ezekiel 12, not a very sportsmanlike opponent at all. And whatever, that's Magic Online, I guess. All right, so moving on to the next game. Dope EDH. I only got a couple more for the 9th. And Dope EDH is running a Kadena Slinking Sorcerer. So one of those cards I have to read, as well as Obscuring Aether, another card I have to read. As for me, I've got a Preordain. My opponent plays a Morph cheaply, and I could plow it, but I decided to rather sit on a counterspell. I don't know what else is coming out of this, but I'll go ahead and plow into turn, and I do, and it is a Kadena Sorcerer that if I had sacked my fetch land, they would have been able to destroy it. So the Swords to Plowshares right there was huge. Because if I sacked my fetch land, they could have turned that face up, and it's a stifle effect. So wow, thank goodness here. My opponent has no pressure on me at all. Panharmonicon does nothing. Naya, God of the Hunt. See, cards that don't do anything on their own, like the 3 my opponents played, have allowed me to win this game because that's 3 cards I don't even have to deal with. I can just ignore, and if they become a threat because of something else, then the something else is what I'll attack. Anyway, I'm just kind of chilling here looking for an opportunity to get my tithe off, and my opponent's just not hitting land drops. I've got limited resources, so I want to set up that scenario, right? Finally, opponent does play Bojuka Bog, which is unfortunate, but it does give me a double tithe. So I go ahead and just play a land here, and now I can run out Dak Faden and steal their Panharmonicon, because I might as well steal something. And before I'm getting ready, I'm not going to play limited resources this turn. I'll go ahead and let my opponent do whatever they're going to do and then counter it. And then on the next turn, I'll go limited resource. I'll run out limited resources, wasteland them, play a land, exactly like I discussed in the last game. So really good stuff there. But my opponent gives up before we even get to that point. So fair enough. But you notice, like, a lot of times I'm not actually playing the limited resources because I have already won. So it's like winning with a Winter Orb in your hand, kind of, or an Armageddon or something. But when it's good, my goodness, it's so good. Anyway, and now I've got some games against 5 color bad stuff, and you can see it shows up a lot in here. So this is the viewer who was play testing against me or playing against me in one of my previous videos in the multiplayer format. Popped on to say hi, like you did today, and I responded back. Excuse me. I responded back saying I was playing 1v1 and decided, hey, I'd like to play 1v1, and so tweaked a deck that, needed more tuning, right? But played with it anyway, and then I think tuned it up a bit and then played again. You can see a couple days later with a little bit more time and attention to it. And we played a few games then, so we'll spin through those. But before I do, I'll go ahead and hit the last couple against, and we'll just make it a set against 5 color bad stuff. So I'll hit these last few that are interlaced here, including the one that I lost. So there's this one against Snozzberry Dreamsicle. And I don't remember what happens in these games. Why are we not able to replay this game? There we go. Okay. So Snozzberry Dreamsicle playing Sigarda, Host of Herons. And looks like I have an early Teferi hand. If I don't get wasted out of the game, this is going to be an insane start, right? So turn 2 Grim, turn 3 Teferi is insane. Opponent has Mana Crypt into a Planeswalker, though. That's also crazy. I'm going to get rid of the Mana Crypt. And the Planeswalker they've got, I'm going to pause right here. Opponent plays a second Planeswalker. So they've got a Johnny Color the Pride that rewards them for having creatures, a Johnny the Great-Hearted that also rewards them for having creatures, but they have no creatures. So I've got time. So I go ahead and ponder, looking for land, find it, play a land. Teferi untaps my Cephalid Colosseum, and I'm done for now. Opponent's just plussing up Planeswalkers with nothing to do over there. I am going to shuffle because I knew the rest of my cards were not land, and I need land. I Teferi into more mana and get a Grand Dynamo on the board. Opponent finally plays the Mana Crypt that I tucked a few turns ago and runs out Sigarda, which I'm going to go ahead and Factor Fiction in response to. Opponent decides I can have Toxic Deluge or all the rest, and I decide I'm going to take Deluge, actually, because my opponent here is about to make a gigantic Sigarda, and I do need to answer that. So I'm going to go ahead and dig Brainstorm so I can hit lands and twist my opponent's hand, play Dak Fade, and steal their Mana Crypt. And Toxic Deluge. Oh no, I don't twist opponent's hand. I deluge their board, and then I set up this way. Okay, I'm going to pause. So then my opponent finally gets to where they can ultimate a Johnny Color of the Pride, which I was expecting. They run out of Baneslayer. I wasn't expecting. I was hoping, because my life total is a bit low. So they run out of Baneslayer. They pump with the Johnny, and this was a little bit unfortunate because I was going to pay 2 life here for each creature, and instead I have to pay 6. I knew that my opponent's ultimate was coming on the Johnny, so of course sandbag the Snapcaster for Toxic Deluge. So I'm getting set up for that, and I'm also setting up for the limited resources turn as well as the Mind Shatter. So the goal here is going to be to lock their land down, twist their hand away, kill all of their creatures, and then well, we'll see. So I go and plus up Dak, throwing away counter magic because I'm unlikely to need much counter for a bit, given what I am doing right here. I have more important things to do. And I go ahead and pick the 5 lands that I want and lock my opponent down so they cannot hit land drops, and this prevents them from doing something like Ancient Tomb Sigarda, which means I'm pretty safe, right? Mana Crypt is gone, Ancient Tomb is gone. It's going to be real hard for my opponent to beat me at this point. I'm going to go ahead and Spellseeker into a Demonic Tutor, untap a couple of lands, and I'm all set. I've got a brought back up, so it's going to be real hard for my opponent to kill anything in play in a meaningful way. I've down to 1 life. But at the end of my opponent's turn, I'll go ahead and gain some life. Twice, I'll jump up to 11 using Mana Vault, sacking Vault, Crypt, and 2 flyers. And with me at 11 and my opponent essentially locked out of the game, as well as the fact that I'm going to be able to beat down their Planeswalkers off the board, they give up entirely. Of course, had they not, I have some really interesting plays that I can make very soon with Brought Back. For example, I can plus up Teferi once more, and then I can minus Teferi, tuck something, bring it back directly into play with 5 counters used a second time immediately, as well as potentially on a Colosseum turn or something along those lines. I have Demonic Tutors. I can go get Narset and Narset deck fading my opponent. There's so many things that I can do at this point. I think giving up was just fine, but it was an interesting game there. I thought I played pretty well, and then I end up. So we're gonna hit this King Crimson game. We'll run through these last couple, and then we'll do the 5-color bad stuff. And mixed in there, I think, is a game. There's at least one game I recall playing very well and feeling very proud of. So hopefully, it will it will shine through. But anyway, I have to mulligan here, and I'm facing Nicole Bolas, and I end up keeping, and it's a risky keep, right? But I keep it because I have Force of Negation. I've got double Moxes, and so one more mana source of any sort, a land, artifact mana, whatever, and I'm totally off the races. I get a Doretti out that's hard for my opponents to deal with. I can protect my board. I'm all set. Instead, I draw no land. I draw no land again. I decided to play the Mox because my hand is a bit full. Opponent gets a Cavern of Souls to add insult to injury. I draw no mana. And I'm going to go ahead and just skip ahead a little bit. And opponent takes a card out of my hand with Nico Bolas. And I draw no mana. And I draw no mana. And at this time I had Search for Azcanta in here. Instead of Gitaxian Probe, and you can see I would have much preferred a Probe there. And when I finally draw mana, my opponent has already played a Flip Nicol Bolas, a Nahib the Eternal, who's giving him all kinds of mana, has a billion lands into play, and I just give up. I just give up. I'm like, between the insane mana flood and then this extreme mana screw, I was frustrated. So I just give up on that, and we just move on to the next game. So definitely ways you can lose a game, but also reasons for increasing the number of blue cantrips like Gitaxian Probe to smooth out the variance and make the deck more consistent, right? All right, so now I've got these games against Jabogo, and the thing is, if I were playing that same game in the multiplayer format, I wouldn't have quit, because in that game, even though I was super mana screwed, I could have tutored up a Winter Orb and played Winter Orb, and then my opponent would still be beating the tar out of me, but they wouldn't be beating me up while snowballing ahead. They would have to stop with the development and wait. Winter Orb would buy me time so that the beatings wouldn't get stronger. So it's like, without Winter Orb, what happens is, the opponent's got me in the mount and they're pummeling me with blows, right? Without Winter Orb, every punch is arriving, and it's hitting harder and harder, and there's more and more punches, and eventually, it's inevitable. With Winter Orb, they get me in the mount, they're punching jabbing, jab, 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 but they don't have the ability to deliver the haymakers, and that means that there's a chance, even though I'm seriously in trouble, that I can get out of it. It's one of the reasons I love Winter Orb. It's one of the reasons I hate not having the card. When you take out, with all the cards I've taken out, you take out Winter Orb, you take out Balance, you're removing that ability to say, well, no matter how bad it is, there might be a way I can get back in this game. The comeback cards are just gone. So in 1v1, it's more wise to concede more than I'd like. It's one of the things I don't like about it. But again, it is what it is. I jumped into the format not understanding what I was jumping into. So, all right, next game is against Jabogo, and we'll run that. And this was on the 10th, so the deck list is a little bit different. Actually, maybe I should run through the 5-color bad stuff on the 9th first. Then we'll do the games from the 10th, and then we'll do 5-color bad stuff on the 10th. I think that's how I'll do it. So let's run through the 9th to avoid maybe getting too confused. And so this is the channel viewer here that I'm facing, and my opponent is running a Atraxa deck in this first game. And I've got a pretty nice hand to start off with. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just close this out so we're not distracted. My opponent has one sick start. Super savage, very fast start, threatening to beat my face in with a batter skull on top of everything else. My start has slowed down a bit. Anyway, I go ahead and decide to sit on Muddle because I'm a little bit concerned about whatever could be the follow-up to that, like a hymn or something. But the most likely follow-up is just my opponent puts batter skull into play, and I can't do much about that, really. So I'm just going to have to wait it out and be patient. Oh, excuse me. So get the Muddle. I'm going to start taking some beatings. Opponent runs out Dark Ritual, and I'm hoping it's something I can muddle. Instead, it's a Rec Sage. They take out my Clamp, which was a recovery card that I could potentially have used down the road to draw lots of cards and, have a better shot in the game. Anyway, but it does mean that I can play Breya this turn if I want to, and I decide that that's what I'm going to. I decide at first that that's what I'm going to attempt, but I'm going to pause because my opponent had exactly 2 cards in hand, and I could shatter for 2. Again, I want to prevent the situation from getting worse. I decide I'm going to actually run the shatter and then sit on the deluge, because if I curve out, if I do hit a mana drop that I can play off a workshop or a land, I get to go deluge with muddle backup or merchant scroll for force of will and deluge, and then either one of those routes would allow me to clear the board. So I decide I'm going to wait one more turn here. Also, my opponent's got, if I hit my opponent and they have nothing to do, they've got a Traxa mana, so there's a strong temptation for them to play their commander there. And that's what I want, because that means I get more value out of the deluge. And I do top deck a land, so I run out deluge, and my opponent has force of will and a blue card as the last 2 cards in hand. Thank goodness I played it in this order instead of the other order with the shatter. So go ahead and clear this out. So I was feeling really good about this game at this point, about the decisions I made, and I've got time. Find myself a Weathered Wayfarer. I get a Merchant Scroll. I go ahead and grab a Mana Drain and run out the Wayfarer. So now I'm in a great spot to where if my opponent wants to play their commander, they've got to either play Artifact Mana or a land. Instead, they pick up Batterskull from the board, because remember, Deluge only killed the token, it didn't kill the skull, so now they've got 2 cards in hand. But for my turn, I'm able to play Breya, and I have a fetch land out, so my opponent can't really, I can still Wayfarer, and I even have Colosseum if I really want to Wayfarer. So we'll get there. Oh, excuse me. Opponent untaps Mana Vault here and goes for the Batterskull, and I decide that that is not an issue. I don't need to counter it when I can just Breya it. So I go ahead and charge. Instead, I find a Vindicate, so I go ahead and just kill the Batterskull. The Germ dies, and I actually attack in with Breya and friends. So now I've got pressure. I've got the ability to get a land. If my opponent plays a land, I can Wayfarer for a Wasteland immediately. Opponent runs out Tasigur. I'm going to go ahead and just leave that there because I'm not quite ready to Mana Drain. I have nothing to Mana Drain into, so just don't want to waste it if I can help it. Finally, I find a Narset, and I go ahead and Narset down into a Mana Crypt, which is huge because it gives me enough mana to activate Breya twice here and still make the play that I really want to make, which is the Colosseum. So go ahead and smash for damage. Shrink Tasigur twice, and pass for the turn. My opponent draws, and during their draw step, I go ahead and Colosseum them for 3, which they cannot draw the cards off of because of Narset. So it's just strictly discard 3. Opponent has 3 cards in hand. This is during their draw phase, so they actually are going to dump their entire hand and say done because it's the only play they can make. And then on the next turn, I'm not taking any more flip damage or anything. But I've sacked my land, so of course on my next turn I get to Narset minus. I get a draw step, and if my opponent ever plays a land, they're still in that same kind of Wayfarer, gets a Wasteland problematic position. But on top of all that, opponent's only at 13, so 4 or 5 takes him down to 8, and I can sack for 3 and take him to 5. So in 2 turns, the game's over anyway. So 5 color bad stuff concedes there. I think that was perfectly a legit concede. I think that was the one I grabbed here. Did I miss these first 2 games? I might have. Let's take a look. So it would be a Traxa again, I believe. And yeah, okay, I somehow skipped those. So that was actually game 3 anyway. So this is game 1 against the Traxa. 5 color bad stuff's a Traxa deck. So I've got an early, ET. Force of Will is good. Feeling all right here. I don't need to really rush the game here. I'm not quite sure exactly what I want to get just yet. So I'm just going to relax and play a little draw go. Opponent misses a land drop. So now I'm going to not play cards on my opponent's turn because I don't want to give him anything to counterspell with. I don't want to give my opponent the ability to play a card for value when I can have him discard for nothing. So I'm not going to play anything at all. I'm just going to play draw go. He runs out a Mox Opal, but that's not a card that I'm going to care about at all, excuse me, mainly because hold on, so I'm going to pause. Mainly because Mox Opal, it doesn't do anything for now. On my turn, I play my 5th land and go ahead and play limited resources, which limits me to 5 lands and my opponent to 5. He's way behind on mana. This is the other thing about this card that's crazy. Opponent tries to disenchant it here, so I'm going to protect it with Muddle. And then I still have my Force of Will ready to go. And my opponent then does play on and a Mana Crypt, which I attempt to force. The force sticks. Opponent goes for a Thoughtseize, and I decide I'm going to Enlighten Tutor in response. So that means I'm going to lose a Confidant, but I got to go get a Search for Azcanta. So I run out Search, and from there I play a land, and I get to run out Breya. So I still had Search at this point in the deck. But yeah, very nice because, so this is the interesting thing. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lands in play to 3. Remember, limited limits the game state to 10. So if we get 6 to 3, if I can flip Azcanta, I'll have 7 to 3, and then that's it. My opponent can never play another land again. And Azcanta will flip here, so I'm not going to get rid of the Snapcaster Mage, but I do flip it. And now I've got a Library of Alexandria and an opponent stuck on 3 lands for the rest of the game. Opponent then plays Snapcaster, realizes their error. He was thinking he could tap the Mox Opal, I think, to disenchant, realizes his error, and then just concedes. One of those shame concedes, which, it's a mistake. We make them. It's not that big of a deal. But in the truth of the matter is, this was never going to work anyway, right? And with Azcanta flipped, this game is totally over. All right, so play a second game, and I don't think my opponent was expecting limited resources. And I've got a Mana Crypt draw, so I'm going to keep it. My opponent runs out an early Ponder off a Chrome Mox and a second land. Gilded Drake gone, so that's a threat that I'll try to keep in mind down the road. I do top deck a Impulse. I was planning to go Confluence Crypt for a Remand, but Impulse is good too. My opponent goes for a Trinket Mage, and that provides a lot of tempo, so I'm going to stall him out a little bit and dig by remanding and then drawing for the turn and then impulsing and looking for more mana. I do find it, so I go ahead and fetch into a Stoneforge Mystic. And at this point, do I still have Better Skull? Yeah, I think I do. So I go ahead and get that. One of them runs out Trinket Mage and gets, of course, Mana Crypt because he knows what he's doing. And I top deck very little that I can actually do here. I can cheat a Better Skull into play, and I can play nothing else in my hand. Well, limited resources, but this is not the time for that. Opponent goes for Regrowth and a Ponder. Ponder's further improving his situation, gets a Coalition Relic out, charges it up, decides not to attack into Better Skull. That's probably wise. I'm going to go ahead and slam that. Still looking for some land here, please. Can I draw some? All right, so I'm going to lose life to Crypt, but I do top deck a land, so now I can go ahead and slam to Fairy and take out that Relic, which I think is pretty important. I get an attack for Better Skull, damage, and get some life back. So the Mana Crypt. The nice thing about having Skull is that Crypt, you don't have to sack Crypt or get rid of it. You're not going to die to a Mana Crypt with a Better Skull in play. My opponent actually has their own Better Skull, interestingly enough. All right. I'm going to go ahead and draw for Teferi and find more mana. So I now have 2 blue for the first time, and I'm able to play Jace, bounce their Germ, and put more pressure on my opponent. Chooses to chump with Trinket. I'm really happy to see that because if you had a way to get rid of, and I go ahead and Wasteland him after untapping. If I had a way to get rid of my blockers, I wouldn't want my opponent to be attacking my Jace. So with that gone, I'm happy. And then he runs out Chains and a Howling Mines. He's trying to put together like a combo over there, and it's vaguely good. But of course, my plan is Necro. I go ahead and plus up Teferi. I plus up Jace. I just discard the worst card in my hand in order to do it. I go ahead and play Search for Azcanta, which of course flipped will work around Chains of Mephistopheles because it's not actually a draw effect. And pass for the turn with Cryptic Command up. Opponent is hurt by their own Howling Mine, by their own Chains. They can only keep one of the cards off the Howling Mine. So runs out Anomizawa Jete. And I think I Cryptic here and probably attempt to hurt their mana. Okay, we're going to bug out. The game's going to bug out. I think this was an end of turn Cryptic. I think end of turn I Cryptic and... Yeah, I don't remember this happening, but I think like I somehow bounced the Chrome Mox. I just leave the Chains there. something along those lines. Anyway, and eventually I Teferi the chains out of the board, and then from there I've totally got control of the game. But that's it for the second game. The third game you saw. So we'll run through the fourth game here on 9-9. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, and so still playing as Commander Atraxa, and I get a first turn mana vault, which is never bad. And my opponent claims it, which turns an excellent draw into a very, very sketchy draw. So go ahead and kill their land and hope that, because he fetched the Bayou, so hopefully that means that he's having a little trouble with his colored mana there. Unfortunately, he gets a fetch land again. Runs out his own mana vault, a sword, and an opal. That's scary. This does not look good at all. I get an Enlightened Tutor, and I play a Cavern of Souls, and my opponent ETs. So this is just looking absolutely unwinnable almost. And Enlightened Tutors for a land tax, which a little bit ambitious, but runs out of Ponder and then passes for the turn. Now, actually the land tax does make sense. Never mind. I'm kind of stuck. I can Enlighten Tutor, but nothing good is gonna make a lot of sense here. So I decided. So I could have gone and got like Crypt into Thran, but then I have colored mana problems. So I decided to go Talisman with Vampiric Tutor capacity up. So as painful as it is to waste an ET on a Talisman, it's what I've got to do here. So now my opponent taxes, and I can Vamp if I want to. But I decide not to because I'm concerned that the Vampiric Tutor will get countered. Anyway, I try a main phase Tithe off a top deck, and my opponent remands it back to my hand. Opponent goes for Duress. Now I have to Vamp in response. And what do you get here? Well, the card I got, opponent then runs out of Trinket Mage and gets himself a Mana Crypt. And the card I got was Dak Faden. So I go ahead and just steal that Mana Crypt right away. Opponent used the opportunity from the Crypt to equip Sword of Feast and Famine. And mashes in at Dak. Takes Dak off the board. Which makes sense. They know I've got a Tithe that I don't care that much about. Maybe a little bit. But they don't know what the other card is, but it's been stuck in my hand the whole time. So maybe it makes more sense to wait a bit. Anyway, fortunately, I top deck Toxic Deluge. So I go ahead and Tithe. Run out of land. Not sure that I would have played Hallowed Fountain here, so we're probably going to bug. I certainly would have fetched it, though. And then I tap 2, 3, 4, Thran Dynamo, Toxic Deluge, sweep the board. And then on my opponent's turn, they can replay Atraxa, but if they do, then I've got tons of mana in a Breya and a Skull Clamp, and I'm just going to Breya, kill this thing, clamp up, draw a bunch of cards, and realizing that the game is actually over at this point. Remember, Trinket and Atraxa are gone. My opponent actually scoops. So, and we had some games in the past where I told him I'd never let him land tax. And I think he misunderstood. I think my opponent took it as, I think Five Color Bats took it as a challenge to actually get a tax off in some game against me and managed to do it that game. So bravo for proving me wrong. Eventually, however, now the next thing to do is leverage that into a victory. But I am certain that with the continued pressure and challenges and increasing skill and deck quality, that my loss is, the handwriting's on the wall. Eventually I'm going to lose. You can see that the games against Five Color Bats actually will get more and more challenging. So I believe this was on the 11th, right? We were looking at, that was that the 11th or was that the last game of the 9th? I'm going to take a look. I apologize that I don't remember. Nope. And I'm giving away some of the games. So what happened? Was that the second game on the 9th? I mean the 4th? Which game was that? Yeah, so this is the game where I get killed. Okay, so third game, the fifth game of the night. I gave some of it away. I apologize, but we'll go ahead and spin through it now. So this is a fifth game and final game. So I take a mulligan and tuck an extra land, and now I'm able to Imperial Seal. And so I've got a Fact or Fiction in my hand, so I really want turn 2 Fact or Fiction. So in order to do that, I need to go get a Soul Ring here. I can run out off the Ancient Tomb, and then boom, Fact or Fiction. I get a split like this, and I choose the 2 piles. So it did split the 2 better cards correctly in the sense, I mean, when I take the 2 pile, it's a little bit better for my opponent sometimes. Um, so I do think that that was probably fine there to have done it that way. Opponent then impulses and is runs out of wasteland, kills my ancient tomb. That's unfortunate, but because I've been holding this Azorius Chancery for a while, I'm actually really happy to see it. So I go ahead and on my turn attempt to fabricate. My opponent has a mana leak, so that's not going to fly, but I can play the Chancery now. I just pick up the Underground because I want to, if my opponent has a wasteland, I guess I'd rather have him kill that than kill the black that I'm going to need for a Mnemonic Tutor. All right, so I clear my attack step just in case I'm giving information away by not doing it. Tempted Demonic Tutor, my opponent has a counter, so I run Muddle on the DT, and with the exactly 1 white and 1 colorless, I go ahead and Stoneforge, and I Stoneforge into a Skull Clamp, the thinking being that I'm going to need to refill my hand ASAP. I'm very low on cards, and so I run out Breya. My opponent used the opportunity to play in his search for his Kanta, but yeah, I'm going to go ahead and run this out and draw 4 cards right away. And now it's big trouble for my opponent. Of course, next turn I get to do the whole play limited resources thing on my 5th mana drop, and then from there, any mana drops that I play are going to prevent my opponent from getting more mana into play. Opponent has a hit mana off of their search, which is pretty good, obviously. I'm going to go ahead and equip and smash. I don't equip Breya here because I was thinking that Breya might like, so I'm going to pause. I don't equip Breya here because I'm thinking that Breya, I may need to sack Breya and an artifact at some point, and so I don't want to have to re-equip the Jitte. And I don't play limited resources just yet because I can't follow it with a land drop on the immediate turn. I can Mystical Teachings here, and that's a much more efficient use of my mana. But also, if my opponent does play a land here, they get the 4th land and they flip the Azcanta, they'll be at 5 as well. So I'll have to decide whether or not, I want to play the Azcanta before I get a wasteland down to deal with the search, the flipped search for Azcanta, right? Whether or not I want to play limited resources, rather. So how I want to deal with that. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and search here because certainly I do, but my opponent actually does not flip Azcanta. So I go ahead and Mystical Teachings, and I go get brought back. And so now what I'm going to do is play a land, fetch, sack it. And I think this is actually really cool. So I get to run out limited resources, right? So I've used a fetch land, run limited resources, float some mana, pick my lands to keep, kill my other land. Brought back both of my lands into play, even with limited resources out. Play a Jace, bounce that, and smash. And now, even though I have played limited resources, I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lands into play. And my opponent has 4. And their graveyard's not full enough to flip search for Azcanta, so my opponent's stuck on 4 lands forever unless they can deal with the limited resources. And I thought that was like a really cool play there. And I'm going to deal with the search soon enough. I have Teachings in the graveyard, so I can flash it back and disenchant it. Opponent does get a Liliana of the Veil into play, and just takes a card out of my hand. It's a Mana Confluence that I cannot play anyway, so I'm fine with that. I'll go ahead and Jace, I find Yogg Will. It's just gross. So I can actually will and get more lands into play right now if I want it. So if you see how that works, because I have a fetch land, so I could will, fetch, and then brought back the fetch land. So anyway, my opponent for their turn goes for a Gilded Lotus. I'm going to flashback Teachings in response. I decide I'm not going to worry about the. I'll deal with the Azcanta in a bit, but right now I want to mana drain and fuel up a monster Yogg Will, and I chase into a disenchant anyway. So I go ahead and shuffle away cards I don't want, disenchant that thing, pre Yogg Will. That way I can will and then follow it up immediately with another disenchant, taking out the Chromatic Lantern. And then something that I was considering for a moment was I could set up for a brought back by minusing and killing the Mystic and then replaying the Mystic off of brought back or off the will. But I decided that's just a little bit too fancy. I'm doing just fine here. I can 6 is 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I can actually attack for lethal. But I wanted to just have a bit of fun beforehand, so, I do. But 5-color bad stuff, scoops it up at that point, which I wasn't trying to have fun at his expense. I was trying to just have fun, right? Anyway, So we move on to the 10th, and for the 10th I have 3 games against randoms and then 3 more games against 5-color bad stuff. So the first one is King Crimson. This is the closest version to the current version, with the exception being that I don't believe in this version I had Gitoxium Probe. I think I had like Opt, and I don't think it ever comes up. So I have to mulligan, and I mulligan to this hand, and this is a familiar story. This is Nicol Bolas. For some reason, I don't think, wait, was this the loss? Didn't we go over this already? Yeah, this was the loss. I'm sorry. We already went over that. So I was supposed to play against Jabogo here. Here we go. I was like, man, that looks real familiar, and because that was a super frustrating game. There's no way to explain that. So it looks like I still have the better skull in right now, but I'm playing against Malik, Jabogo running Malik, and I've got early mana drain set up along with a DT and all kinds of good stuff. So I'm feeling real comfortable with this early keep. And all right, so there's a little bit of Drago happening here. I'm not gonna tap out. I have mana drain. I'm just waiting, biding my time, hoping my opponent does nothing, so that on the next turn they run their commander into my mana. I go ahead and just play another land. I'm just gonna chill here. I decide actually I'm gonna Demonic Tutor and I go get brought back because there's a really nice opportunity here if my opponent, depending on what happens, my opponent is it Charms, draws 2 and discards 2 and decides not to play their commander. So I'm gonna go ahead and I really want that brought back to happen, so I'm just gonna go ahead and clear my turn and see what happens. So I'm hoping the mana drain, I'm hoping to brought back. I want it all to happen. I want to do it all. One plays Arcane Melee or Melee, which allows them to play instant sorcery cost for 2 less. So I'm going to go ahead and brought back in response. And then when that resolves, I attempt to mana drain it because I feel like that's just too much value and it sticks. So with that, I now have a ton of mana available, and I go ahead and run out a Soul Ring and Crucible, another land. How insanely fast I'm drawing all these lands, right? And getting all these lands into play. I get to run Jace here, and then I'm going to use fetches and then play Teferi and most likely play Teferi, but I could play Daretti. Either way, um, it's pretty much over. And it's all off of the strength of these 2 instants right here, right? Like ramping me up to the moon in terms of mana for this giant turn where I had 4 lands. I just thought this was so cool because I had 4 lands and I went from 4 mana to this turn where I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana plus the 5 that I drained. So I went from having 4 mana to turn 14 in one turn. It was so insanely cool. My opponent just gives up, and I thought that was just a lot of fun. And that was the tutored up brought back. So I was like, all right, pat myself on the back for fetching that card there. All right, so Rosenbauer here is running Psymaster Thopterist, and I have another very strong hand, not extraordinary, but certainly strong. Opponent gets a Skull Clamp out. That's scary. So I just decided to tutor up a Force of Will because I'm afraid of what happens if Psy gets in play with the Skull Clamp. So I tutor for a Force of Will, and then also I want to be able to slam either Necro or Jace depending on what I can get to first and back it up with a Force, ideally. And with me just going and getting Force of Will, my opponent just scoops. So I don't know why the mono blue player hates Force of Will so much, but they didn't stick around to explain it either. So anyway, I got a game against a tiny man cow running Galta, and I have to mulligan, but I mulligan into a really fast hand with an early Narset to get some cards into my hand, which is fantastic, and an Enlightened Tutor to do it quickly. So I'm going to go get Mana Crypt, run out Talisman, and fetch up and go get Narset into Mana Drain, just feeling lovely right now. Opponent plays Secure Tribe Elder, and instead of threatening my Planeswalker, they just sack it on their turn. So I then go get to tithe for 2 immediately on my turn instead of having to wait for their turn to get the 2 cards. Opponent then runs out Nissa, and I go ahead and Mana Drain that. I've got Teachings in my hand. It's going to be yummy Mana Drain mana, so I go ahead and Teachings for a Snapcaster and pass. And I've got 6 mana untapped, so I can actually, my opponent runs out of Seedborn Muse, and I'm thinking, Man, I just got a Snapcaster, so I decided Snapcaster Mana Drain's the way to go, and with all that mana, I flash back Teachings into a Factor Fiction, and we're going to bug out. But I Factor Fiction, and things just get, well, I've got a million mana in a Factor Fiction running and a Forbid with buyback, and my opponent can't draw extra cards, so you can kind of figure out how that one went. Anyway, 5-color bad stuff here. Last 3 games on 9/11. Only games I played on 9/11. So this is a version that's even closer to the version I'm running. And I think this is the one where everything's the same except for op, but I will pay careful attention. And my opponent decides to suit up Sliver Queen. How interesting. Certainly different. I get a first turn Coalition Relic here against my opponent who has a Underground Sea and is able to play nothing, does not play anything on turn 2. So I'm going to charge that Relic. And feeling pretty good here. I go ahead and take black mana off of it. Excuse me. And run a main phase Vampiric Tutor for mana expediency's sake. My opponent then plays a Vampiric Tutor, throws down a Mox Diamond and a land, and passes. I decide I'm going to risk it and charge my Relic because the card I got was actually Chromatic Lantern. I just want to make sure that my workshop counts for something. So I float blue here, and my opponent tries to remand. I try to mana leak that, and my Lantern sticks, which means I'm going to go ahead and Merchant Scroll into a Force of Will here so that I don't just lose the game on the next turn. My opponent's got a ton of mana over there. But the Lantern ramps me up from 2 mana to 4 in terms of colored mana. Opponent then runs out a Merchant Scroll into a Stoneforge into a Numazawa's Jitte. I'm going to go ahead and use this opportunity to play Urza. And I'm thinking, like, my opponent cannot, like, even if they put Jitte into play and equip it and attack, well, then all that's going to happen is I'm just going to block with Construct. My opponent does play a Tide, plays a Jitte, equips it, decides not to attack, which I think is reasonably wise. So I go ahead and Mystical Tutor off the Construct at the end of my opponent's turn for a Vandal Blast. And we'll get rid of that Jitte as well as that Mox, plus the land that was invested into that. So very happy there. For my opponent's turn, they run out a Mind Shatter for 2. I could Force a Will it, but that just exiles one of my cards for no purpose. So no, I'll just let it stick. But I do get to play my commander here. So I've got a ton of mana available. I decide I'm going to do something I've never done, which is activate Urza, and I see a land, and I've already played a land. Shoot. Okay, well, I didn't really want to draw one anyway, but that's a shuffled up land, so that doesn't even mean anything. So during my upkeep, I go ahead and activate Urza, revealing a land, so I go ahead and play that for free, of course, and I draw an Enlightened Tutor for the turn, and bash in for 10, because I'm not really doing great here. I'm not doing poorly, but I'm not doing great. My opponent goes and fetches a Vandal Blast. Now I'm going to be doing pretty poorly. And then runs a Vandal Blast against this board, and I am not happy, but what can you do? So I'm going to go ahead and sack and kill the Stoneforge Mystic, and then I'm going to go ahead and Enlighten Tutor in response, and I am going to go get, this is what you can do, Necropotence. So I'm going to go ahead and sack the Wooded Foothills for the Badlands, and this is exactly why Badlands in there, just so that all of my fetch lands can go get any of my colors, even though Badlands lives up to its name in every other circumstance. And I'm going to Necro for 7. And even though I'm behind on board, my opponent's down to 1 card in hand, and I'm only down by really not much mana. And with a Necro effect going, that's going to change real quick. The opponent runs out a Quiet Speculation, and is able to go get a Deep Analysis, Ancient Grudge, and a Rare Revelation. Decides not to, I think, does something weird and does not ray my Necro off the board, which I find strange. I don't know if they're going for trying to Necro lock me, but it's not. Yeah, I'm not sure about this setup here. Meanwhile, though, I'm going to go ahead and get Narset down. I'm not even going to use it because I can just Necro for 4, and there's no need to. For 1 extra life, I can get 1 extra card in my hand. I don't need to Narset just to save myself a life. A Narset on 5 against a deck that runs red cards, I might have Bolt, is a lot better than Narset on a lower. Okay, finally he goes for the Ray of Revelation, realizing, okay, yeah, I got to get the Necro down. But in response, I'm going to go ahead and Necro for, I calculate how many cards I need next turn, and I go ahead and Necro for 4. And On my turn, draw a Wasteland, which is huge, so I go ahead and take out Tundra right away. Opponent bounces Narset with Rift, so I never actually got an extra card there. But I go ahead and just use the opportunity to play Mox Opal, Stoneforge, cast a Sword of Feast and Famine, use the Urza to produce ridiculous amounts of mana this turn, equip Sword of Feast and Famine, and replay Narset, attack, get all of my mana reset, take a card out of my opponent's hand, Brainstorm. I go ahead and run out Expedition Map, which now produces blue, so I converted Workshop mana into that. I get a Brought Back and a Disenchant, and then I brought back, I can't remember what it was that my opponent killed this turn. What did they kill? They killed, I don't remember what they killed. What did I actually brought back for? That was a weird one. I actually missed, I think it'd be in the game log. Yeah, game log. I'm going to pause it for a sec because I actually missed, what did I target? I played brought back targeting, Wasteland. I brought back a Wasteland. That's nasty. Yeah, so I'm able to Wasteland my opponent again this turn. And then I Archmage's Charm and steal their Chalice on 3 that they were able to play off the top. And I'm just taking cards out of their hand. I mean, it's just getting gross, right? Expedition Map, fetch up a Chancery and Preordain. And yeah, this is just super gross. I go ahead and get Colosseum. I run out of Jace, plus it up. See a Mox Opal, let them have it. But if they have a card that I don't want, I can Cephalid Colosseum. I decide, you know what, they're almost dead anyway, so I'm just going to take that last card out of their hand just to do it. Now I'm just dirtling again. I'm just having a little bit of fun because I like putting my deck through. Like I just like to see what I can accomplish in a single turn, just being a little bit absurd, but having a little bit of fun with it as well. I go ahead and Vamp and take myself down to 4 there. Clamp the Snapcaster I used to play the Vampiric, because I use that, and I have not played a land yet, so I'm setting up for a Crucible, Wasteland. Oh no, excuse me, Crucible Colosseum. No need to continue to Wasteland my opponent when I can now run Colosseum Narset and just continuously take away their draw step, and then I attack for lethal, and my opponent finally concedes. I think that was the last game, unless I played him out of order. That should have been it. So we'll flip through this a little bit. So no, it looks like, was this, I guess there was one other game, but I think that it listed them out of order or something, so we'll run through that last game. It isn't the same game, is it? Maybe I'm being confused. We'll take a look at it. I think that it did play them out of order though, and so I think there was this game. Yeah, because I had to mulligan multiple times in this game. Double mulligan's really nasty, yeah, especially in a control on control matchup. And you can see that, 5 Color BS is over there is definitely running control, right? So I've got a nice Mana Leak Impulse set up here where I can protect myself depending on what my opponent tries to do, and a Vandal Blast even if they went for like Crypt or something. So I'm going to go ahead and Impulse into some more mana, and that gives me a redundant red source for Vandal Blast. It turns out I top deck a Duretti, so it gives me a Duretti, and I decide I'm going to run out the Duretti here. Opponent could have a nasty turn here where they go after my hand, but the cards in my hand aren't that great. Instead, my opponent does this interesting play. Crypt, Ritual, Treachery of the Construct, play the Gilded Lotus, get a True Name Nemesis out. Yeah, this game is actually important. And I understand why they stole the Construct. It was to make sure that I couldn't just kill the Lotus right away. But I top deck Archmage's Charm, which is in this version of the deck, and I steal Mana Crypt, which is really nasty for my opponent. But they do have TNN. However, they can't actually get to, oh, look at that. Can't actually get to kill my Duretti just yet. It's just going to hurt it. And then plays Teferi Time Raveler and bounces his Crypt back to his hand and replays it. Super nasty for me. Taps the Lotus for Serum Visions, plays a land, and passes. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and kill the Lotus, of course, play a land, and run out Breya. Because I really don't have a lot else to do, and I need to get that Teferi off the board. I can't Mana Leak right now while that's there. Opponent has a Gilded Drake for Breya. So now I've lost the access to Breya, and my opponent kills Duretti. And then sacks their Mana Crypt. I'm able to at least attack and kill their Teferi, and then I Vandal Blast my own Breya off the board. and I've got Mana Leak and an Expedition map sitting up. So my opponent's going to hit me for 3 here. I can't do anything about that this game ever. But it's just an attack for 3, so we'll see if it really matters all that much. I run out Expedition map and a Confidant and crack in for 2 and pass. And my opponent does get their 6th land into play. Of course, I'm sitting on Expedition map here, so we'll get that running in a moment. Decides against playing their commander. Well, no. Yes, has a better play, or yeah, that's what it was. Was trying to cast it during combat, realized his mistake. So runs out the commander, and I believe I Mana Leak it here. And it looks like we're going to glitch out. And basically what ends up happening, I'm going to just kind of slow it down, is my opponent continues to hit me for 3 every turn, but because of the Confidant, loses control of this game, and I pull further and further ahead. And then I'm able to, like, even though I get really low, I'm able to turn this game into a race. And I shift gears and I move into attack your life total mode. And pretty soon I'm already hitting for 4 to 3, right? So I'm already coming out ahead on the exchange, but I'm taking occasional damage from Confidant, so I'm not fully ahead on it. But at some point I get like more pressure, and then from there I'm able to just race. And I just race the True Name Nemesis, and eventually he realizes, oh crap, I got to stop attacking. But by then it's too late because now I've got cards and I'm ahead on pressure. And of course Breya allows me to gain life and ultimately to sack guys and finish them off, if I remember correctly. I don't actually remember how the game played out fully, but I do remember TNN. It was like good for a turn or 2, and then it was just a 3 damage per turn sort of Armageddon clock. But it's just not fast enough, right? Just by itself, it's just not good enough, and didn't really do a lot for him. So we kind of talked about whether or not how good that card actually is. And that's it. That's all the games that I have. Hopefully you've enjoyed them. Again, the deck, as it is about 75 and 5. I'm still not, sure that I'm not making mistakes in the build. As you can see, I took out Search for Azcanta, but it has some really good synergy with limited resources, potentially, because you can flip it after resources to get that 6th land into play, and so that you can lock your opponent on 4 mana, or you can flip it after resources even when they have 5 and you have 5. You can still have your 11th land as the limited resources, and that's pretty powerful. It's a way to... You can play it post-limited resources and then flip it and still get that 6th land into play. That 11th land across the board is what I meant. And still get your 6th land into play. So, I really like the card a lot, but what I hate about it is it's slow. It's real slow, right? Once it's going, it's savage, but it has to be going. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily where I want to be. The other thing, though, I could consider, and I have been considering, is I could run limited resources as an additional way to put cards in the graveyard, along with like Fact or Fiction, right, for more fuel. And then maybe I do something like I take out Git Probe and I take out, say, Archmage's Charm, and I run the Delve card. So maybe something along, let's say limited resources, I mean Search for Azcanta. So maybe I run something along these lines, and I go with Cruise and Dig, which are 2 pretty busted cards on their own. And then I run Delve. Yeah, this guy. Or not Delve, Search. All right, let's do Azcanta because Search will bring up all the tutors and stuff. So, and then maybe I just run something along these lines. So I take out perhaps these 2 cards, and then something else in here can go in the 2-drop range. Kind of hard to say what, or maybe in the 4-drop range. Like maybe I pull, say, 1 more card out. I mean, I don't know what it would be, and I just run these 3 cards, right? Something along these lines, so it would look similar to this, although I'm not exactly sure how it would end up lining up. So that's also an option, though. It's hard to say. I mean, these cards are a little bit slower. These cards are a little bit more early game interactive, and then of course this is a great early game card, but it's got I don't know. I just don't know. So for now, I think I'm leaving these out. The problem with these 2 is that, man, do they suck if you flip them to Confidant, or if they get mana drained. It is so painful. So could be the case that I'm better off just keeping the curve low and sticking with the build the way that it is. But I think that's something interesting to think about, and maybe an interesting conversation starter. If you have an opinion, I'd like to hear it. I'd like to hear your thoughts. And what do you think of the 1v1 list? Do you enjoy watching the 1v1 games? Do you want to see more 1v1, or do you want to see more of the absolute powerhouse that is the fully powered? This is the fully operational Death Star here, and this is the rebuild after the Rebels blow it up the first time. So, which one do you prefer? Do you like the fully powered multiplayer games? Do you like the 1v1? Do you prefer the live games? What are you looking to see? Like to hear it in your comments, thoughts on the card selection, and other than that, don't forget to check out Brian's podcast in my last video, or not Brian, Weissman's podcast, but Brian, who runs the All Things Considered, interviewing the other Brian Weissman, if you're interested in that sort of thing. So hop back to my last video, grab the link out of the comments, and then other than that, let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed yourself, and I will see you next time.